All right, guys. So here we are in YouTube. I'm gonna just shut everything down here on Google Meet. So, guys, I'm off Google Meet. I'm on YouTube now. All right, and so I'm gonna switch my screen here, my view, over to. Huh. Oh, there we go. Okay, that's strange. All right, so here we are in Blender. All right. Okay. So let's do a little bit of recap. I'm going to, if you remember, in Blender we can, oh, and I have to change my settings, and I'll make it my permanent settings here. Input, remember emulate 3-button mouse, you want to have that on if you're on a laptop. In my case, I'm going to change my click to a key map after doing key map. Select with mouse button, left mouse is to select. Okay, so I'm also set my select with mouse to be left mouse. Let me say this is my preference, save preferences. All right, so again, to left click, to select something, you just left click on it. To tumble around, again, recap, Alt, hold down the Alt key and left mouse button if you've turned on emulate 3-button mouse in your preferences, or you have to use middle mouse to tumble. Okay. And again, to zoom, middle mouse and control to zoom in, zoom out. Oh, let me turn on my screencast keys as well. Interesting. So I've recently updated my my Blender. It seems that screencast keys is not, this version of screencast keys is not compatible. I'll have to find a solution for that. But that is, it's not ideal. But I'll be sure to kind of mention what I'm using as we go here. Okay, so again, just to recap what we some of the main things we talked about last week. In object mode, we can select different objects, right? And we can tell we're in object mode. We see it up here. So we just left click on different objects. We can box drag to select multiple. We can drop the selection by box dragging off of the objects. We can also press Alt A to drop the selection. We can press A to select everything. We can also press A twice quickly, AA, to drop the selection as well. We can, whoops, when we select something, we can press G to move it. We can constrain its movement to a certain axis by tapping G to go into move mode, and then immediately tapping the axis that we want to constrain its movement to. In this case, the Z axis. Okay. And then we can left click to confirm its position, or right click to cancel it out, and it'll go back to its default. We can delete an object by pressing X, tapping the X key to delete, bring up our delete options. Of course, we can rotate, we can scale, and we can duplicate by pressing Shift D. Okay. All right. All right, so I want to today just kind of recap a little bit of the edit mode modeling options that we have, and then start talking about how we can make our models look a little more visually interesting using things like materials. So we'll look at materials and shaders, and then we'll look at texturing, basic texturing, and we're starting this really early. but there are, you know, several very simple and basic approaches we can take to texture our objects or to get images into 3D. And I want to kind of start talking about them now. I want you guys to get as comfortable with UV unwrapping as possible over the course of this semester. All right, so let us delete everything. I'm just press A here to select everything, and I'll press X. I will delete everything. This 3D cursor, if you remember, have our 3D cursor, I can move its position by holding down the Shift key and right-clicking. And you know what? I'm going to see if I can grab a screencast keys plugin. I'm just going to quickly see if I can just grab another one. Go to add-ons here, type in screen. I want to find out why this is not working. It's supposed to work for this version. Go to documentation. I'm just going to quickly search screencast keys Blender 2.93. Okay. And I found one here. This looks interesting. I'll try this out. So this is it here. I'm kind of, it's gonna be a little bit hit or miss because I don't know if I've never tried this. I'm just kind of finding something now, but it could be the same one. This is if it's the same one, this is a more recent version. So I'm just gonna go ahead and grab this, and we'll see. You guys will see how I can install a plugin in Blender. It's fairly simple. Let's see if I can actually find where. Okay, so the release page, version 3.6. Okay, I'll grab that. It should give me a zip file or a Python file, and my browser is, I think, understandably probably skeptical about this link, so it's I have to force it to download it. And I don't even know what this file type is, or that's not the download. Oh, here it is. Of course, I'm pressing the wrong thing. So this is what I want: screencast keys .zip. So generally speaking, to install a plugin, it's a zip file. I have a place on my computer where I put all these Blender plugins. I put it here in Blender. You can see I have a lot. Screencast_keys.zip. So I'll just save that in there. I can get rid of this window, and then I will go for, I'll remove this plugin. Okay, and I'll install, and I'm going to navigate to that same folder. It was Blender, and I'm going to go by date modified here, and that should give me the most recent screencast_keys here. Install add-on, and it should be that simple. It's here. It's basically installed. I just have to enable it. And it looks like it's a little bit different. Enable on startup. Sure, I'll keep that on. And the rest we'll see. We'll see as we go. But it looks like it's got quite a bit of functionality, maybe more than the other one I had. So that's good. So let's see if it is. So this is it here. Okay, so it's telling you even the mouse press. That's good, actually. It's telling the button press. The size is way too small. Let's make that a little bit bigger. Sorry guys, we're Okay, and let's go for a bigger mouse size as well. Let's change the color of that. Beautiful. Okay, this is great. Excellent. All right, that was a worthwhile adventure. Okay, so let me. Okay. Let me continue on here. You don't have to use screencast keys. I was just showing you that where sometimes it's blocked by a blender panel when placed in the bottom left. Oh, really? Okay. I'll keep an eye out for that, Mituthan. I guess I could put it top left. Let's see. Align to. Well, let's keep. I'll keep an eye on it. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll try up there. We'll try it up here. Okay. But I think like if I have a menu, sometimes it'll cause problems. Anyways, here we are. I'm gonna press Shift C, and that's gonna put my 3D cursor into the center. And I'm gonna press Shift A to add a new object. I will start with a cube. Okay. And then I'm going to jump over into edit mode. Okay, so I'm going to jump into edit mode, and I'll have this cube here. I'll quickly show you in my default setup, I like to have, I'm thinking about if I wanted to make an asset for a video game, if this was a crate or if this was a modular component. I don't want the pivot point of this object to be dead center in my object. I would actually want it to be on one of the corners. So there's an easy way for me to do that. A couple easy ways. One is I can just go into vertice selection mode again by pressing 1, 2, or 3 on on our keyboard up top. If I press 1, it gives me vert mode. 2 will give me edge mode. 3 will give me face mode. So I'm going to press 1 to get vertices. I'll just select one of these corners like so. And then I can bring up a option selection, a snapping option menu, Shift S, and that'll give me options such as snap cursor to selected. So that 3D cursor that I put in the middle of my scene, if I put that 3D cursor on top of this here, I can do some extra things. So we can think of the 3D cursor as almost like an assistant, and you know, it allows us to take certain intermediate steps to kind of reposition our object's origin, and that's what I want to do here. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to choose this option here after pressing Shift S. Just do it one more time. So select the vertex here. I want this origin. So here I'll tell you what my goal is. The origin point of my object is right here, dead center in the object. That's the default. Whenever I instantiate a new object, it's the origin is going to be in the center. So if I rotate, you see it rotates from that point in object mode. Okay. I want this origin though to be positioned at this corner. So when I scale, it scales up from the bottom. So if you imagine if I had a floor here, I wouldn't want the half of my object to scale further down through the floor. I would just want it to scale upwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tab into edit mode. Okay, so tab into edit mode. I will select one of these vertices on the corner. I can use my 3D cursor here to be the target of my origin in object mode. But first I have to tell it where to go. So I can luckily press Shift S. Okay, Shift S allows us to do all our snapping options with our 3D cursor. So we could snap a selection to the cursor. So if I do that, this point would snap to the position of the 3D cursor. Cursor to world origin, I also can do that with Shift C. But basically what that would do is take the 3D cursor and snap it to the world origin, so the XYZ 0 of my 3D scene. But what I want for now is cursor to selected. So whatever I have selected, and I just have this one corner vertice selected. If I tap this now, you'll see my 3D cursor now snaps to that particular point. All right, so this is all I need to do in edit mode at this point. I can go back to object mode. I can also do that by pressing tab. Okay, or there's the option up here to switch into object mode. But now my 3D cursor is dead on that vertice. Okay, so now I have an option. I can right click and I can say set origin to 3D cursor. And then now you'll see that pivot point of this object is now at the corner. If I scale, it scales up from that point. Oops. It scales up, right? If I scale on the z-axis, it only goes up and down like so. All right, so if I'm trying to make a ledge or a platform in my game, this is a very, very good way to do that. And then if I wanted this to have like some non-destructive extra detail on it, I can go over here into my modifiers, okay, this wrench here on the side. I'm just going to close this dialog here on the right hand side by just tapping the N key. And one other super important thing, guys, again, today's lesson is so critically important, so try to pay attention as closely as possible. Something I don't think I mentioned last week but is important to understand is hotkeys in Blender are window context sensitive. So if I press G to grab something and my cursor here is in the 3D viewport, it's going to try to use that command within this window. But if I press G in here, you'll see this doesn't move. It's because it's detecting that my cursor is now in the boundaries of this outliner, right? And there's nothing to really grab and move in here. And same thing here in our modifier stack, right? So there's nothing to really grab and move, at least at this point. But there are other windows that we can have certain data and I can select it. So there's things I might be able to select. So if I were to change this, for example, from a timeline to a UV editor window, okay, and if I were to tab into edit mode, okay, and I'll just up here with my cursor up here in the 3D viewport, press A, you'll see I have this, these are basically called, this is a UV. These are UVs, and this is 2D coordinate space. Instead of X and Y, they use U and V because X and Y are already used in the 3D coordinate space here. But basically, this is a way to map 2D images onto a 3D object. Okay, so if you imagine I had a drawing of a monkey here, that monkey could get mapped onto this object, right? So each of these faces and each of these vertices corresponds to a vertice here in my 3D space. So this is almost like papercraft if you think about it. Like if you were to have a object and you could unfold it, and if you could lay it out flat, it would look something like this. But you'll notice that these faces are stretched, and there's no stretched faces here. And that's because these are two separate spaces. You can do all kinds of different things. So I can have these be distorted and not represent the actual size or dimensions of the shape in my 3D object. Usually you don't want that. Usually you want it to be the same, but you can map these however you want. But what I'm trying to, I guess, demonstrate is that we can select each of these points. And if I press G here, if I'm hovering over here and I press G, you'll see I'm moving my 3D object. But if I'm hovering in here and I press G, I'm going to move some of this UV object data. It's not going to affect what's happening up here in a way that we can see right now. But it's basically allowing us to grab and move. And it works exactly the same way as everything works up here. So we can grab and move, right? We can right click to snap back to where we started, right? Or we can, interesting, I'm not getting screencast keys here. Let me just check something. Or am I? No, I'm not. Why is that? wonder if it's because I offset it. Nope. So this is unfortunate. It looks like the screencast keys here, it might only work in the 3D viewport. Okay. And another problem that I just noticed is when I had this offset, like if I offset it too much, see how I resize my window? See how that affects it? So because of that, I'm going to just keep this bottom left, just to be safe. All right. So anyways, point I'm trying to make here is we can scale, right? We can rotate. We can even constrain to a particular axis. So I can press G here, and in this case, I know it's UV. UV doesn't work. I can press G and then Y, okay, which is up and down, right? Or X, which is left and right. Okay, because it's a 2D coordinate space. Z won't do anything. Okay, so Z won't do anything. But yeah, rotate, scale. I have some of the same space options as well, or some of the pivot point options. So there's actually a 2D cursor here as well. So just like up here, I can shift and right click to position that. This 2D cursor, and I can set that to my pivot point. So if I scale now, you see that these UVs, they scale to that 2D cursor. Okay. We also have individual origins, which it's harder to demonstrate here. But if I had, for example, you have different selection modes here as well. I have vert, edge, face, okay, and then I also have island. Okay, so I actually have a fourth mode here in UVs, where I can select the entire island. But anyways, that's just to kind of provide you guys some context on the fact that and we'll be covering this a little more in depth as we go. But I just wanted to show you guys that hotkeys in Blender are window sensitive. They're context sensitive based on which window you're in. So if you're pressing G and your cursor over here and you're wondering why you're not going into move mode, that's why. Okay, or if you're pressing R and it's not working, that's why. But you have to, you know, put your cursor over here and you're good. All right, so let's keep going. Let's talk about a few things we can do. So one of the things I was going to tell you guys just now is we can set this, we can add a modifier, so we can add some extra detail to our object in a non-destructive way. So there's a nice modifier we can use called bevel. Okay, and it'll give us a simple bevel on our object, and you see we can kind of adjust the amount, how big that bevel is, and how many slices it's going to give us, like so. And then you'll see if I scale right up and down, it's going to do its best to kind of maintain that that beveled object. All right, and this is non-destructive, so like I said, we can actually delete it. So you can hit this X here and get rid of it, and it'll get us back to our original form. Okay. And I'm just going to move this. One other thing we should be aware of is snapping. We didn't really talk about that last time as well. But if we turn snapping on, then I can basically select this object, and when I move it, you'll see it snaps to the world. So if I change this here, snap to increment, and set it to absolute grid snap, it will snap to these spaces in my world. So I can actually just snap it right to 0, 0, 0, my origin, right? And then now if I scale, up and down, I have it working like that. I can duplicate this, Shift D, right? Press the X key to scale on the x-axis, or to move on the x-axis, and then I can scale up and down, right? So you can kind of imagine me having an element that I want to use in my game, and I can easily kind of build out my world space like so. All right, and then rotation. Again, it'll rotate from that corner. I can rotate this by 90 degrees, and I have perfectly aligning elements, and that's just really nice and satisfying way to work. Okay, so what's the difference between UV editing and edit mode in Blender? UV editing is the way to add images to our textures or to our geometry, because how else, like, how would you guys think about, how would you take a 2D image and put it onto the geometry? I mean, you could do different things. You could treat each of the faces as its own canvas, right, and map a 2D image to that canvas, right? That's one thing you could do. Or you could kind of just project it on, which we can also do in Blender, but we have to be very deliberate about telling Blender how to manage that process, or any 3D application for that matter. So UVing is not unique to Blender. It's something you'll do in Maya, you'll do it in Max, you'll do it in any program. It is just a universal thing that just happens in 3D. It's the way to get 2D images to appear onto a 3D mesh. You basically have to take this 3D mesh and map it to a non-3D space, to a 2D space, where we can assign pixels to different parts of the geometry. Okay, but before we do that, we'll talk a little bit about something else. We'll talk about materials, and that's just a way to quickly and easily assign different colors to our geometry. Okay, without adding an image or anything like that, we can just assign like simple colors to our geometry. So let's talk about that. How do you select the whole object with one click? I just left click on it. But that's there's another option in Blender to right click. So you might be on right click as your selection mode. Once upon a time, right click was yeah. So Substance Painter allows you to paint directly on your mesh. Blender actually also allows you to do that. Oh yeah, so Ricardo, yeah, you might be in edit mode. That's what it is. My object isn't scaling from a corner of... Yeah. Okay, Mel, I'll quickly kind of cover that again. I'll delete all of these. Delete that. Shift C to move my 3D cursor back to the center. If you remember, wherever my 3D cursor is where when I create a new object, it will appear at the position of the 3D cursor. It doesn't have to be in the center of the world, but I generally like to press Shift C just to recenter the 3D cursor when I add a new object if I'm in a blank scene. Now I'll press Shift A to add a new object. I'll add a mesh. I'll add a cube. Okay, and you'll see the origin of the cube is dead center on the object. Okay, I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to select one of the corners, right, like so. I'll press Shift S to bring up my cursor snapping options. Okay, my 3D cursor snapping options, and the option I want is cursor to selected. Okay, you'll see that 3D cursor now snaps to that corner that I selected. To move the object origin, I can't do it in edit mode. I have to do it in object mode. So I'll go here, object mode. Now to move the origin to the 3D cursor, I can right click, and I have to do right click here, set origin to And you see I have different object options here, but the option I want is set origin to 3D cursor. Okay, and now the 3D cursor will be at the corner. So now if I scale, it'll scale from that point. Okay. All right, so I'll show you one other way we can do that. So I'll delete this again. Okay, Shift C to put our 3D cursor back to our origin. Shift A to add a mesh. I'll add a cube, like so. And now I'll jump into edit mode. And you'll notice if I move the geometry in edit mode, the origin actually doesn't move at all. See, that origin is still there, still dead center. So I can actually move my object in edit mode relative to its original point, and I can also kind of get the same result that way. So if I were to shift this all the way up here with snapping on, okay, so my snapping settings are snap to increment, absolute grid snap. But now if I jump out of object mode and I rotate, you see it's rotating around that that point. And if I move it, you see that the origin point here is offset from the geometry. Okay, and that's because I moved the components of this object. Remember, the object level, it's simply a container. It's like simply a space. It's got a point in 3D space, and it's got a transform matrix on it. So it's distorted. It's stretched on the z-axis, or it's stretched on the y-axis, or it's it's all 1 to 1 to 1. But it basically stores all that. Like it basically is a container which stores some transformations. But if I dive into the container and I go to edit mode, now I'm able to move or kind of manipulate the components independently of the container, right? So I can actually move the corner onto that origin, and then jump back out of object edit mode into object mode, and now I have it set up like that. So that's another way we can do it. I'll quickly show you that one more time. Delete this again. Shift A. I'll add a cube. Tab into edit mode. Okay. The quick way I'll do this is I'll press G, Z, 1 to snap up by 1 unit. And I know that my cube by default in Blender, it makes units, cubes, and shapes that are 2 meters, 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters. So I know that half of this, is 1 meter. So if I snap it up on the z-axis by 1 meter, the bottom of my object will be flush with that point. And now if I press G on X and I move on the x-axis and I move by 1 unit, now I'll be on that one edge, and now I just have to do G, Y, 1, and now I'll be on the corner as well. Okay, and now I'll get the same result. So 3 different ways to kind of get to the same result. Well, kind of 2 ways to do it, but now I have that same idea. You can hold control. Okay, Aiden. So that's actually, I'm glad to hear that. This is something that the Blender community has been like asking for millions of years. Because in Maya, you could press, I think it was X or something, and it would or V, I think. I can't remember. But there's a button you could hold, and it would allow you to just manipulate the origin. So you're saying you can do that now in Blender as well? Let me see. Control. If I hold the control instead of having to enable, instead of enabling this mode, okay. But there's a way, I think in Maya you press insert and then you can kind of just move the pivot point. From my understanding, they were supposed to do something like that in Blender too. I just don't know if it's been done yet, but that would be very, very welcome. Anyways, okay, so So yes, let's take a look at materials now. So I'm going to duplicate this a few times. Shift D to duplicate. Constrain on the x-axis. Let's move it 5 units out. Again, you can turn on or off snapping. If I turn on... Oh, do I have to be in... Okay, so thanks, Aiden. So if I'm in move mode and I hold down control, then it temporarily puts me into snapping. That's actually very, very useful. Okay, and even for scaling operations, it'll give me the... it'll allow me to snap. That is exceedingly useful. I appreciate that. Okay. I'll do this one more time. Shift D. Hold down control. This is going to be handy for me. And I'm going to rotate on Z and I'll hold down control. You can see up top on the top left as well, up here. I'm trying to put my cursor there, but on the top left, it's also showing me the amount of the rotation. So I can see that it's snapping by 5 unit increments. So this is my for it. So up here, you'll see that it's telling us how much we're moving by. So it's good to be aware of that. I'll just, okay. So I have 3 objects here. I'll just make sure you have like 2 or more. And I'm going to apply different materials to each of these objects. One thing to be aware of though when we start working with materials is how our geometry is being presented. So up top here, you'll see we have different view modes. Okay, the first one is wireframe. Very, very useful in a lot of cases, especially in edit mode, where we want to kind of do very precise or intricate modeling or do selections, and it's the actual polygons are getting in our way. Wireframe mode becomes very, very handy that way. Then we also have just regular kind of gray base model view mode, which is here, and then we have preview render mode, and then we have proper render mode. Preview render mode, it's lit by a default kind of image. Uses an image like a dome surrounding our scene that suggests like a certain type of light. You can click on this little drop down, you can see what that looks like here, and we can click on this gear and you can change it. We don't have any what's called HDRIs, so for now let's not worry about that. And then this last one is our render mode. To change our render modes, you'll see that over here in our properties we have a camera. And here we can change our render engine mode. I think by default it's set to cycles. You guys will have to confirm that for me. But we can also change this here to cycles. Cycles is the mode we probably don't want to use. It's going to be more realistic, but it takes a little time to calculate. You can hear my fan going on my computer. It's a little bit more computer intensive. We have CPU mode and we have GPU mode. GPU mode will rely on my graphics card versus my CPU. It'll be faster, but I might run into some other issues with like, video playback or whatever else you're doing at the time. But it is much faster. Generally speaking, you'll want to use GPU compute, especially if you have a decent GPU on your machine. But we generally don't want to work in cycles render mode. We want to be in what's called Eevee, and Eevee is more like a real-time game engine kind of style render engine, and that's where we're going to kind of get really quick real-time results. And I would say Blender over the past year or so, or a couple of years, has kind of really exploded. When I started teaching Blender here at the school, it was kind of like, it was by no means like, as popular as it is today. It was solid and I liked it, and I thought it kind of offered a lot of really useful workflows and everything like that. But when they added Eevee, I think it really kind of like it made it more enticing to people who are accustomed to using Maya or 3ds Max or Houdini. And so, it's become actually to the point, I think, where even if your studio uses Max or Maya, Houdini, it's good to know Blender as well. But anyways, I'll show you why. We have this Eevee render engine mode. So again, to get this to work, you want to make sure that you're in your properties here. You go to this camera icon, change your render engine to Eevee. Okay, so you also have Workbench and Cycles. Workbench is also super cool. Workbench is great if you're trying to do like really kind of nice preview rendering. We have a lot of really neat options in here. But for our purposes, we don't want to do that. We're going to go for Eevee. And Eevee is looking for actual lights in our scene to kind of properly light up our objects. So let's add a light. If you remember how to add an object, you just press Shift A. Okay, and we'll go ahead and we can add a light. We can add a sunlight. Sunlight is a directional light. Okay, so it actually doesn't matter its position. It's just basically what matters with the sunlight is just the rotation of it. Okay, and I'm also going to add a ground plane. So I'll just move this light upwards. Not that it matters, just I'm moving it upwards so that I can see it. And I'm going to add a ground plane with my cursor at the 3D at the center there. I'm going to just press Shift A. I'll add a mesh. I'll add a plane. Okay, and I'll make this plane really big. So I'll press S to scale it. Let's press like 50 to make it big, like so. Okay, so now we have these three objects sitting in our scene. Yeah, I need to get better a better cooling system here. It is absolutely like a jet engine. It sounds as loud as it does for you guys. For me. Okay, so we have this, and yeah, so everything's the same color. So let's think back. Let's think back to last year when we talked about the elements and principles of design, right? So this is actually a very harmonious scene, isn't it? All right, we have, especially if I go here, we have very harmonized values and harmonized colors, right? Nothing really stands out. So we want to probably change that, right? We want to be able to see stuff. We want to kind of add emphasis, or be able to kind of say, look at this or look at me within our scene. I love these shadow shapes. That we get really nice contrast, these shadow shapes, and we can do a lot with that. And I actually really like when I work with a directional light, like a sunlight like this, to get really long dramatic shadows, like to make this light more angled, right? And we can kind of get these really interesting shadow shapes, and these start to read together. They run together and they start to read as one kind of shape. And I'll just use my annotation tool here so you can kind of see this. Becomes like one big shape, right? Harmony. This is harmonized, right? And color-wise, it's all harmonious as well, right? Color is harmonious as well, right? Value-wise, we have some contrast, right? There's a little bit of contrast between this and this, right? Light to dark, light to dark. Light to dark, right? We also have this here, right? So this is annotation. So this is kind of like the grease pencil, but a little bit different. I can access this here on my, if I tap N, it'll bring up my navigation panel here on the right hand side, and you'll see that the second option from the top is annotate. And if I hit this note here, I can make this visible or invisible. The annotation by default is going to be based on my view. I think there are some other options. View, 3D cursor, and surface. But anyways, what we're doing here is we're just playing with light, looking at things in Eevee render mode. But what we want to do is start adding some more kind of like uniqueness to each of these elements, so that we can differentiate, distinguish. In a game, if I want these platforms to be visible so my character can jump up on them, I want them to, definitely read. So I want to make them stand out from the background. So let's talk about materials, and let's talk about shaders, and how we can play with that. I rotated it, Ricardo. I rotated it. And by the way, I'll actually delete this light just so you guys can see the other types of light we can make. I'll delete this light. Just select it, press X, delete. Back in darkness. I will press Shift A. Go to lights. I will add a point light. And you can see I can just move that through my scene as well and kind of illuminate things. So this is giving me a little more drama, a little bit more mystery to my scene, where now I have contrast, but it's kind of falling off. So I have this emphasis that as we get further and further away from this light source, we start to kind of get more harmonious, murkier, more mysterious, right? So we can also use this deliberately in our games, or just as we're composing things to kind of increase that drama, and that appeal, and really be in control of like where we have that, where the contrast lives, and where it sits, and where it's not, right? And just kind of make that a little bit more visually interesting and appealing. I can duplicate this light, Shift D, right? Shift Z to constrain its movement to the horizontal plane. Kind of go like that, right? Do it one more, Shift D, Shift Z, and move one back here behind, over here. All right, and then I have this kind of interesting composition. But we can play around with this, right? Like there's no limit to how we can sculpt and play with the graphic impact of these choices, these design choices that we're making. Okay, so what I'm trying to kind of insert here is that all the things we talked about last year about the elements and principles of design absolutely continuously apply as we step into 3D. In fact, in 3D it's easier for us to kind of play around and tweak and adjust and make sure that we're on we're getting the result that we want. And as you can see, we can very easily harmonize things. So even if these were like drastically different colors, as they kind of fade away from the light source, they automatically kind of harmonize. They all automatically kind of bleed together. Okay, yeah, so you have to be up here, up top, viewport shading. You can also hold down the Z key. Whoops. Hold down the Z key and you will get these different options. So I have solid mode, wireframe, material preview, and then rendered mode is the mode we want to kind of go into. Okay. All right. My favorite kind of light, spotlights are great. My favorite kind of light, and I'll delete this one, is the Shift A. I'll add a, point lights are great, but spotlight is my favorite. So point lights are great. I want to make a spotlight. So let's press G here to lift up our spotlight. Our spotlight, why do I like it so much? Because we can kind of like direct it. We can be a little bit more focused with it. So I can say just point here. By default, I don't like it, with its like default parameters. I tend to kind of like play with that a little bit. But Spotlight gives us a lot of power. So to change the parameters on our lights, you can go to this green light bulb here. And incidentally, if I select one of these blocks, you'll see the green thing becomes the components, so the vertices. So green in our properties here basically denotes kind of component level parameters that are unique to that particular object. The orange thing here is our object level, right? So if you remember from last year when we used grease pencil, we had a green squiggly line for grease pencil when we have that selected. So any kind of component you have, or any element or object that you have selected in Blender, you'll have your object level settings, which is just the transformation space, right? And various relationships. And then you have your green component level parameters where you can kind of tweak the actual object. So here, if I select this light, this spotlight, I can change things like its power, how powerful it is, right? I can change its color, like so. I can change its radius. So how big is that source? Is it like a sharp point, or is it like a large kind of bigger area that is that's shining that light? And then the cone size, I can adjust that as well. So I have this size here, which I can adjust. So I generally make this a little bit bigger. And the blend is the cutoff, right? So see that transition? If I set this blend to 0, it's going to be very sharp. But if I kind of bring this all the way up, I get a nice, soft, smooth fall off. And again, I can get this nice dynamic between these sharp edges between like where the object turns abruptly away from the light source, and then I have these more soft transitions as we get to the edge of our spotlight's cone, right? So yeah, so these are kind of just different lights, and let's just make this cone size just a little bigger. Rotate this, and all this stuff that we're doing applies to any 3D package. It applies to your games. It'll absolutely apply to Sketchfab when we get into Sketchfab and start composing our dioramas and being really conscious of how do we want our things to be lit. We never ever want to use the default lighting. We always want to be in control of that and tweaking that to our own specifications. All right, so we have this. So we've looked at lights. We've looked at like our basic render modes. So again, we have wireframe up top here. Just tap the N key here to hide my navigation tools. T to hide your tools on the left-hand side. Okay, and to hide your navigation tools on the right-hand side. And by the way, you're probably, again, wondering why I have so many of these tabs. It's just because I have a lot of plugins installed. So if you become a Blender kind of power user, or if you keep using it, you may find some paid and free plugins that you want to leverage, and a lot of them have their options here on the right hand side of your 3D viewport. But anyways, so we have these different view modes: wireframe, solid, preview render. Preview render should give us any color information, but it won't give us our proper lighting information from the real-time lights we've set up. And then proper render mode, where we get the actual result of our lighting and everything like that. Okay. All right. And now, so let's talk about materials. So again, very harmonious scene. Great. Harmony is good. If we remember, it keeps our scene looking like deliberate and like cohesive. We do have a little bit of contrast here. All right, so we have some emphasis, which is great, but we can add more, right? Just by changing colors of things. And actually what I'll do with these 3 blocks, I'll actually add one last object, and we'll pretend this is a world, these are platforms, and we'll pretend we have a character. So there's a few different ways I could add a new object. I could duplicate one of these. I could just add a brand new one. What I like to do, once I'm starting to build out my scene, I like to leverage my 3D cursor. So I can hold down the Shift key, and if I right click on something with holding the Shift key, you'll see that it positions my 3D cursor on the surface of that object. This is really useful when I want to say, if I want to add a fake character here. Let's add a very small object. It could be a sphere, it can be a square, it can be a cube, it could be whatever. But I'm going to press Shift A with my 3D cursor here, Shift A. I'm going to add a mesh. Let's add a sphere, a UV sphere. Okay, and we'll scale it all the way down, make it really small, and press G, just lift it up a little bit, like so. I'll make it even smaller. Okay, so I can barely even see it, but it's there. So let's just picture like this is our character or something. Right now, we can't see our character really, you know, because it is, again, the equivalent of if we had a white character on a white background. We have a gray character on a gray background, everything being lit the same way, or a black character on a black background. Like we wouldn't be able to see it because it's just everything's lit the same way, right? And by the way, when I say white, black, I don't mean like race. I'm just talking about the actual color of the object, the actual graphic color. But anyways, so we have that, right? But let's just move this a little bit here. Let's talk about how we can kind of start distinguishing things with materials and shaders. And I'm sure some of you have done it already. But basically, we'll step one on the properties. We'll just go down one further to this. It's not like a radioactive symbol, but it's like almost like a beach ball or a sphere with like kind of like two, like kind of some kind of checkerboard pattern on it. So select one of these objects, this ground platform. Let's select our ground actually. And we'll click on this, and right now you'll see there's no material. So I have to hit new, or I can hit this, I think I can hit this plus as well. So either new or the plus. Or plus just makes a slot. So new will actually give us a material. So let's hit new. And you'll see it'll give us material.002. Let's give this a name. Call it floor. Okay, and then we can change its color. So we can change its color, can make it whatever color we want. But already we're starting to introduce some contrast. Okay, so now I'm starting to help these guys read, pop away from the background. I have a few different parameters that I can play with, so we can make this more metallic of a material if we want, by dragging this from 0 to 1. This is something we'll get into more in depth next year, but when I say next year, like in third year, we really go in depth into working with metallic and roughness and everything like that. But roughness, the more rough it is, the more flat and diffuse our material looks. The less rough it is, the glossier, the shinier it'll be. Okay, we have specular, which is just how strong will the specular highlight be. So just kind of like, again, in a way, the shininess, like how reflective is your material, and everything like that. And I'm just wondering, I'm expecting to see reflections from this to this, but I'm not seeing. It just could be that it's like a little too dark. But this floor, because I've turned the roughness all the way down, it should be fairly reflective. Let's increase, if we increase our specular. So if I increase my specular to 1, you can kind of see the reflection in these shapes here. It's not super strong, but it is absolutely there. You can play with the value on this. All right, and so that's basically how we can start adding materials, and now we can add materials to everything else as well. So these guys, we can hit new, click on each of them, right, and just make a new material. I'll call this middle block. Change the color, make this like a bluish color or something. I can be conscious of the value. Do I want it to be harmonious with the ground here, or do I want it to stand out more? Right? But ultimately, I want to kind of find that balance between harmony and contrast. So I want to be conscious of what elements I want to harmonize and which elements I want to have be more contrasty. I also want to be very careful about making things too saturated. Highly saturated colors, they're really attention grabby, and we want to kind of really reserve uh, the highest amount of attention for our character or the important objects that we have to pick up in our scene, right? So we want to find that balance and kind of just tweak and just get that find that sweet spot. Whoops. So let's make a new material here. Call this small platform or small block. Okay, and again, same idea. Just tweak its parameters, its color maybe. Okay, so I'm also now adding some variety as a principle. So I'm having various like different colors, but I'm also keeping them harmonious by keeping them within the same value range. And based on my lighting automatically forces some harmony into this scene. Let's create one last one here. Let's call this big block. Okay, make this darker as well. Again, lean into that variety, right? So just making this a little bit unique relative to the others. So now I have this basic scene, right? But last but not least, we want to really make our character pop and read. So let's select our character, make a new material, call it character. We can kind of cheat with our character. What we're going to do is add something called emission. We can make it glow. So let's go down like in our material properties. Like you'll see at the top, we have base color. We don't even have to touch that really. We have our metallic, roughness, etc., etc., etc. But we're going to go to emission. Click on that, black by default. But let's choose a color. It's like a nice blue here. And let's play with that strength. Let's set the strength to something like 5. Okay, and now you see my character sits there. He's kind of glowing, and he reads much more easily. Let's set this even higher. Let's set it to 15. Yours is probably not glowing. One of your cubes won't change color. Are you in render mode? Make sure you're in render mode. And make sure your cube is not part of the same object as another cube. So see how each of these are separate objects? If I duplicate this in edit mode, so if I duplicate this, if I go into edit mode and I duplicate it, Shift D, this duplicate will be, it'll have the same material as this. Excuse me. It'll have the same material as this. And any change I make here will apply to everything with that same material. So all of this has the same material. Okay, so you just have to be mindful of stuff like that. Let me know if that helps or fixes your problem. Or make sure that your cube has a material applied to it. So actually let's talk about that, because that could also be the case. So within our geometry, we can actually we can mix and match. Okay, you fixed it. So we can actually mix and match. So I can actually have this object here. I can tab into edit mode. Excuse me. I can select a face or a few faces, like so. Select, say, just these 4 faces, and say I want to apply a different material to just these faces. I can do that. So as we saw in our material editor, I can hit this plus, okay, to add a new slot. Okay, so I can have this is one material, but I can hit this plus, and I have a new slot for a brand new material. So I can hit new here. Okay, and I can give this a name. So I can call this middle block side. And then I have to hit assign. Otherwise it won't do anything. If I don't hit assign, if I don't have some selection, and I don't assign this to that selection, it will just go with my default material. So I have to then hit assign, and now it will take that new color. So now I can jump out of edit mode into object mode, and I can kind of see that difference. Okay, so now any change I make to this base color will be applied to that to the sides, just the sides where I applied it. Okay. And incidentally, I can also each of these is a slot, a container for a material. I can change the material that's assigned in that slot by either pressing the X here to create a new material, clicking here to duplicate the material that I have and then tweaking its parameters, or I can go to a previously made material by clicking on this little drop down on the left. If I click on that, all the other materials that I've made are available to me. So I can grab the character material, for example, and assign it to just this selection as well. But let's talk about one other thing that I think might be an issue for you guys, and that is we do not have, you might not have your emissive object glowing like mine is. So to make it glow, go into your render properties as well again. Just make sure you have these guys checked on. Things like ambient occlusion will make the contact occlusion look better. It'll just make your scene look like better integrated. Bloom, you want to make sure that's turned on. If bloom is not turned on, it won't glow. Okay. Depth of field is also really nice. If we're looking through a camera, we can have depth of field. Subsurface scattering, that's if we want to have a character that looks like they have skin, like real skin, that's like somewhat translucent, and we can see the blood vessels underneath, or the impact of the blood vessels underneath. Screen space reflections, if I turn that off, we don't see those nice reflections on the ground. Okay, so those are things that we want to absolutely kind of make sure we turn on. Okay, so Ricardo, yeah, that's probably it. To make the ground reflective, yeah, you either increase the metallicness, you decrease the roughness. Alright, so I on the ground here, I increase the specular. I decrease the roughness, so if I raise the roughness, you'll see that gets fuzzier, and then it eventually disappears altogether. But if I drop the roughness to 0, I get a nice, crisp, clean, reflective surface, a smooth, very glossy surface. And yeah, and then also you have to make sure in your render settings, in EV mode, you make sure in EV render mode up top here, and then also make sure you have some of these guys turned on. Ambient occlusion we can turn on. We can adjust things like the distance, like how much is that fall off, and how strong is it. Bloom is this guy here. Bloom is, we want to make sure that's checked on. We can adjust the threshold. How bright does something have to be for it to start blooming? What's the color of that bloom? So I can actually change it here as well. How intense is that going to be? How big is the radius, or how small is that radius? And the knee is just going to be adjust like the fall off of that bloom. And yeah, can really blow this out if we want to. Okay, so that is how we can start like dressing up our scenes and just kind of being more mindful of the choices that we're making in terms of colors. So this is really, really useful. We can go a really long way with this, but it's limited, right? Because there might be situations or scenarios where we want something a little bit more complex to appear within our scene. So let's take a break now, guys. And then we'll come back after our break and we'll start looking at how to do some UV unwrapping and some texturing. I expect and I hope that this will be a video that you guys we'll kind of revisit if things are confusing for you, just to see how we're setting things up. But I think we're establishing hopefully a clear foundation on how to start making our scenes look a little nicer, look a little better. Okay. All right, so let's take a short break, guys. Let's take a break. Hope you guys can forgive me. Let's take a break until 10:50. Okay, so 5 minutes. 5-minute break, and then I'll answer any questions you guys have, and then we'll start up again, and we will look at UV unwrapping, adding texture images, and everything like that. Okay. Yeah, I'll show you guys how we made the material glow. There's a few things you have to enable. Okay. So go to your render settings. Okay, so this camera, render engine, set it to Eevee. Of course, this will also work in cycles, by the way. You're gonna hear my camera, my fan go. But make sure you're in Eevee render mode. You can check on ambient occlusion, check on bloom. If I have bloom off, it won't work. Turn on screen space reflections. Okay, you can also see what that looks like. And not really going to need it right now, but you can turn on motion blur as well. This is like if you have an animated camera, or if you have elements moving through our scene and we want them to kind of look like blurry as they move quickly. What else? These are interesting. We don't have to really think about this right now. But as we want to make more sophisticated looking scenes, we might want to bake light maps and things like that. But for now, don't need to worry about that. And then to get our emissive material working, so we'll select this guy. We'll look at our shader, our material settings. And what did I do? I kind of ignored the base color. I ignored all these, and I went straight down to emission. By default, emission is set to black. Right? So I just gave that a color first and foremost. And then secondly, I gave it a strength. The strength is by default set to 1. Okay, so the emissive strength, if it's not greater than 1, it won't kind of bloom like that. So we need to set this to, say, 5 or 10, right? Or 50, or 1,000, to kind of get the result that we're looking for. Okay, I set mine to 15. Yes, Hyder, there's going to be a weekly assignment. It's going to be, in a way, yes, Stephen, in a way. But, we expect the sun to be very, very far away. And that's, whatever we make is going to be kind of like too close to really read as a sun. There's one kind of caveat with this, is that this is not actually a light source. It looks like it should be, but it's actually not. If I wanted this to be a light source, I'd have to actually add a point light right here as well. So I'll hold down Shift, right click, and press Shift A to add a light, a point light at this position. Okay, and then on this guy, oops. So on our light, we'll turn off shadows. So turn off shadows on the light that we made, this point light, and make sure the color is similar to the color of this this blue light that we wanted to kind of cast. And we can change the radius to make it have affect more of the world, and change its strength as well. Okay. If you're working in Unreal, you kind of have to work the same way, unless you have you're working with RTX mode. But But yeah, generally speaking, that's kind of one of the limitations of real-time render engines like Eevee or what you have in Unreal or Unity. Is that when you use emissive textures and things, it doesn't actually work as a light source. It just fakes it by adding bloom. So it looks like it's lighting up, but it's not actually lighting up the things around it that would typically catch light. All right. All right, so I'll do one last thing that I think is kind of cool. We'll add a camera. So the emissive strength, it's in our material. So right here, right below emission, you'll see emission strength. Really, you don't see it? Does anyone else not see it? Make sure your shader is principled BSDF. It's not there. Are you in Eevee render mode or cycles? Oh, you see it. You see it now? Okay. All right, cool, cool. Or you still don't see it? And you still don't see it? And your material type is set to principled BSDF? Because if you don't have a principled BSDF, if you have something else like some other kind of shader, you won't have that option. Interesting. Maybe you can stick around after. We'll take a look and see why that is the case. Which version of Blender are you on, by the way? It should be. Are you on 2.93? That's very strange. Do you see base color? Do you see any of this stuff? Like, did you create a material? Did you collapse it? If this is collapsed, if surface is collapsed, you won't see any of this. So go into here, make sure you have surface, open it up. See base color, you scroll down. You see subsurface, you scroll down. You see subsurface color, you keep scrolling down. You can hold down the Alt key and keep scrolling down until you get to the near the bottom of it. You'll see emission, where you can choose the color, and then emission strength. Let me know if you found that. That's weird. That is strange. And which version of Blender are you on? Check up here. You can click here and then go about Blender, and you should see this is the most recent version, 293.4. Okay. Shouldn't be an issue, but try downloading the more recent version and seeing if that makes a difference or not. That's my only recommendation, but I find that strange because I think it should be in 2.9 as well, which is weird. But beyond that, we can troubleshoot later. For now, let's get rolling again. All right, so we're going to talk about how to use images. Okay, what did I do here? Oh, okay. So because I turn off shadows, let's turn shadows back on that thing. And let's make the radius smaller. Yeah, it's too big. So basically, so yeah, we can make a very simple composition, a simple scene. Try to make it as appealing as possible. You know, get an area of emphasis, and then we can continue making it like a little more interesting, visually sophisticated. I can duplicate this, Shift D, scale it, Shift Z, just scale it on the two axes simultaneously. I can have more elements in here and kind of start composing out like an interesting kind of scene, you know, just with primitive shapes. And when we're doing our diorama, like this is kind of to some degree how we want to think, but we want to, you know, level it up a little bit in terms of complexity and everything like that. Just make it a little bit more visually interesting, you know, or however we can, you know, but always keeping in mind harmony, contrast, emphasis, rhythm, you know, balance, all those things, all the principles we want to be thinking about, and we want to be conscious of the impact of the or the use of the elements of design. So anyways, we can see line here, implied lines like this, the delineation of this dark shape to this lighter shape, that's an implied line. All right, same here, an implied line. We have form, obvious form, like because these are three-dimensional structures. We have color, of course, we have value. We don't really have texture per se, kind of, but not exactly. But we are absolutely, and shape is super clear. We definitely have shapes, right? So we want to be conscious of our use of the elements and principles of design regardless of what we're doing. And as long as we do that, you know, our chances of making something visually appealing just increase exponentially. So I want you guys to think like about everything we did last year as we were kind of working this semester. We took a short break already. So we took a break, William. But feel free. You can kind of rewind the video if you kind of if you got to step away for a bit and kind of keep going. So I'm gonna keep going, and then we'll get to the end here. All right. So what we want to talk about is using images, actual images. There's a very easy way. And hopefully you guys have an image somewhere on your machine, or you can grab an image off the internet. But I'm just going to quickly go into Photoshop. You can do the same. Actually, not Photoshop. Let me go into this is TV Paint. So this is actually something I'm working on, and I have a few ingredients that I can kind of start playing with here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an image that I've made, this monster, right? And it doesn't look like it doesn't look like it, but he's on a transparency. So I'm just going to take this. I'm going to go File. I'm going to export the PNG. Okay, I'm going to export this PNG like so. I don't want to have a background. I just want the alpha. And I'm going to go ahead and hit export. And I already have one. Let's get a different name for this. Okay, and actually let me copy that directory as well. Okay, and I'm back in Blender. So Blender has a really cool thing that we can do. Where I will shift right click again to place my 3D cursor somewhere. And now I'm going to press Shift A to go into my add object, add menu. We looked at adding a mesh. We looked at adding lights. We haven't looked at adding a camera, but I'd like to cover that at some point. But what we also want to add is an image. Okay, so go to image. Do you guys have this option, images as planes? This might be a add-on that we have to enable. Just let me know and I'll wait. You do not have it. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to Edit, Preferences. We're going to go to Add-ons. Okay, and we're going to go to Image, Import, Export Images as Planes. You guys have this option. If you do, enable it. Okay. Okay, sounds like some of you have it, some of you don't. We may at some point need to just make sure we're all on the same version of Blender, just to make sure that there's a consistency there. But if you don't have it, find it here, enable it, and you should be good. All right, so just enable that. If it's disabled, enable it, save preferences, and we can close that. All right, so again, with our 3D cursor at a certain position, you can press Shift A. Okay, and we want to go to Image, Images as Planes. Click on that. Navigate to wherever your image is. And incidentally, this can actually be a movie file. This can be a PNG. I think you can even do a PSD. It can be a JPEG. Just about any kind of image file will work. But for our purposes, we're just going to go with a PNG here. And you see it'll bring in this image on a plane. Like so. And I can now insert this into my scene. Right, and it's a simple image. It's got some transparent pockets in it, so I would have to clean that up, but you can kind of get a sense of we're able to get this this texture now into our scene. So you can start to see how we can start adding more sophistication to our images, right? So, or to our projects. Because imagine if this wasn't just a simple shape, if it looked like a tree bark, like if we had tree bark texture running up and down it, right? Or this had grass texture or something like that, or rocks or whatever. So there's a lot we can do, and it starts with kind of adding textures. So I'm just going to click on this, and we'll just take a look at how it's been set up, or what the material settings are. So when I import an image as a plane in Blender, what it's automatically doing is a few things. It's creating its brand new material. It's naming that material after the image texture that I brought in. Instead of using a base color, okay, so if I look at some of my other materials, so if I select this, under base color, you see it just has a simple color. But under this, under base color, it actually has a reference to that image texture that I used. Right? And this is the image, so I could actually, any other images that I have in Blender, I could also click on here and I say use that instead. I can also click on this folder and say use this other image instead. I can kind of like choose. So this is always dynamic, always something that we can change. But basically we're taking a image and mapping it to that UV coordinate space. So this is a 3D object, but this 3D plane, you know, has a UV coordinate space as well. So we'll look at that again as well. So I want you to take your, if you don't have one, you should have a timeline here at the bottom. Just drag this up. Okay, or if for whatever reason you don't have that window, you can make a new one by hovering down near the border, looking for that your cursor to turn into a plus, and then just drag upwards to make another window. We'll change this window type to a UV editor window. Okay, remember any window can turn into any other kind of window in Blender. Okay, but for our purposes, we want a 3D viewport and a UV editor window. All right, so we have this plane selected, but for whatever reason, we cannot see this image. And we can't see our UVs, and that's because we can only see that in edit mode. So we do have to switch to the component level on this 3D object that we have selected. We have to switch to edit mode. Okay, and once we do, then we'll see. If I select everything here, press A to select all my components, I can now see how this has been mapped. So you can see our 2D image here has been mapped to this coordinate space. So this is the UV space. So U is the x-axis and V is the y-axis. And these guys are the points on my geometry, but there's a correspond. There's better for me to just show you. So let's go into vertex mode here in our UV space. You can do that by pressing the 1 key, okay, or you can click them up here. If I select this and I grab this and I move it, you'll see how it distorts my image up top. Okay, and by the way, I think this is a good time to talk about it. We have this viewport show overlays option, which we can disable or enable right here. If you can see, like, we have the two circles overlapping each other. If I turn that off, then I don't get any of the UI stuff in my scene there. So I can kind of just see the actual impact of the geometry and everything like that. I think for this to work better, I need a light source. Let me just grab. Just going to grab this light source and just duplicate it so that it is lighting up this guy. Make it this one white. And not as strong. Okay, and then I'm just also going to select this geometry. I'm just going to play with the material a little bit, the shader settings. So we have the image, that's great, but there's some other things that I want to adjust. So the specular I want to turn off. I don't want this image to look glossy. And the roughness I'm going to set all the way to 100%. Again, I don't want it to look like too shiny or glossy. Whoops, accidentally added a keyframe. So yeah, if I have the specular too high, it'll kind of like, it gets weird reflections and things like that. I don't want that. So yeah. So anyways, and then to turn off all these the UI type things, I can click on this guy. But first, let me jump back into edit mode with this selected and select everything. Okay, so that I can go in and I can tweak these parameters and turn that off. Okay, just disabling the viewport overlays. I use this so much I set a hotkey. You can right click on something to add a shortcut. And for me, I just set that to the equals key on my keyboard, but it's up to you how you guys want to handle that. But anyway, so we have this here. So this corresponds to this. I can select these, and you see if I move these, see how it distorts? See how if I move this here, it starts to clip off. So that's me trying to show you guys how this is how we can map this to our object. And if I make this bigger, so the position of these guys is totally independent of from our 3D mesh. And if I take this and I make it really big, watch what happens. That's not doing what I expected it to do. I'm expecting it to wrap around. So it must be some of the settings when I bring it in by default. It doesn't. It's not set up to do that, but that's okay. We don't have to really focus on that for now. Let's just go back to our regular bounds. But anyways, what I can do here, I can position this. Say I just want the eye. I can scale this all the way down, and I can just use the eye. I can just have a texture of the eye, right, on that billboard, on that plane. I can duplicate this object. So I'll duplicate this. Let's turn our viewport overlays back on. Duplicate, select this, Shift D to duplicate it. Dive into that duplicate by pressing Tab, right? And I can change the UVs on this duplicate however I want. So I can say this one I want to see the teeth. Okay, so what I'm trying to highlight here is that we have this this independence between our geometry and our UVs. Okay, and however many polygons I have on my geometry, that's how many verts and everything I'll have on my UVs. So if I go in here, let's turn our viewport overlays back on. If I go in here, tab into edit mode, say I add a few edge loops, so I press Control R a few times to create some edge loops here, like so. And I create some more to make some edge loops like this. I can select these now and see if I move this around. See how that area gets affected? So it's mapping this space here to that corresponding polygon. So see how I'm moving this, and I'll just show again, hide my viewport overlays. So you see how just that particular section is getting affected. Okay, so this is really powerful, and we can use it to our advantage. I'm going to turn on soft selection, so we have this ability to select one geometry, one point, and kind of have it affect a larger area. But I can do all of that to my mesh. I don't know why the top and it's not all kind of getting pulled in. Oh, see, I didn't select all of it. So some of the verts, and here's another kind of gotcha, is that any vertice that I don't have selected here, it's not going to show up in my UV space. So be mindful of that. So I press A here to select everything. You see these guys didn't really move. Okay, so let's back up here. Before I did all that crazy stuff. And just make sure we have everything selected here. Just press A, make sure everything's selected, and then I can come back in here, start playing with this and moving things around. So again, this is the simplest way to kind of UV map things, right? We did it very indirectly. We didn't really do it deliberately. What we did, we simply took an image that we already had and we imported it as a plane. But now I could play around with it, like so. My geometry here, just to show. Yeah, so my geometry is still just that simple plane, right? But I've morphed things around, right? So I've basically kind of almost like morphed the space of this polygon. So I made some of these hold more image data, right? But because it's small here, it's going to look more compressed. So the bigger I make it here, the more compressed it'll look here, right? And the smaller I make it here, the more enlarged it'll look here. So let's take a look at this tooth here, for example. So right about here, right? If I'm in here, and if I move this down, right? And this up. Whoops. Let's turn off our proportional editing. If I move this up and this down, you see how it's compressing that tooth shape into that smaller space. But if I make this smaller like so, see how it's elongating and making that tooth shape much bigger. Okay, so it's like very bizarre, right? It's kind of confusing, but that's kind of like how we can work with UVs to really kind of manipulate and kind of make sure that our objects are showing the way we want. So let's just select this one more time. So back in object mode, just select this, Shift D one more time, tab into edit mode, and keep it simple. I can just move these back to the corners like so. Incidentally, I can be very precise with the placement of these. If I press N here to bring up my navigation options. So again, we have an N panel here, we have an N panel here, we have a T panel here. Sometimes we have a T panel in these other windows as well. So the nice thing about Blender is once you learn how to use, like how to move, rotate, scale, and things in one space, it works in every other space too. We can kind of see the impact of that. So rotate, right? Scale, and move. But anyways, yeah, and then the N panel, again, we have that on the side here. But I can click one of these points, and again, this is not a square image, but it is distorted, and this rectangular space is mapped to our 0 to 1 coordinate measurements. So we have X here, so I can tell this to be X1, and you see the snap right to the right border, and I can tell Y to also be 1, and you'll see the snap right to the top corner. This one I can set to be 0 on X and 1 on Y, right? This one I can set to be 0 on X and 0 on Y. This one I can set to be 1 on X on the horizontal axis and 0 on the vertical axis. So, so the important takeaway here is that each of our 3D objects, the way it's stored internally in Blender, is it actually doesn't just have coordinates. So it's going to have a list of coordinates for each of these points, right? So it's storing the X, Y, Z position of this point, this point, this point, and this point. But it's also storing an additional two float values for each of these points, which is the U and the V coordinates, which is the coordinate space within our UV map. Doesn't have to have them. Not all objects have them. We generally will have to add them on our own, but primitive objects in Blender by default are going to have UV coordinates set up already. But it's an extra set of coordinates. It's hidden, but it's there, and basically it's just mapping each of these XYZ positions on an additional space within a 2D space, a 2D plane. Hopefully I'm not confusing. Hopefully I am not confusing you guys. Hopefully that all makes sense. What would the W coordinate be? There is no W coordinate be. There is no W coordinate. It is. Where do you see that? It should just be X, Y, Z, right? And then UV. UV are taken just because they're just prior to yeah. UV is because for a two-dimensional space you only need two coordinates. You need the X and the Y. But since X and Y are already taken for the 3D space for X, Y, Z, they use UV instead. They just kind of go two letters for earlier in the alphabet. Okay. Yeah, I know, confusing, but that's basically what it is. All right, so let's continue on. Let's explore this more in depth and see what more we can do with this. What if using this? What if we had just not one image? What if we had like a bunch of images? What if we had like grass and rocks and a tree, you know, and a piece of road, um, and a ball or something. Like we had multiple images and we put that all together in one document and then brought that in as a plane. Could we then kind of make like separate cards, you know, each one focused on a different element on this UV plane? Yes, we can do that. So let's quickly look at that. You can follow along with this as well if you guys like. And by the way, what I'm saying now, these are the simple ways of UV mapping. This is like basically making the image first and then making your geometry and your UVs align with that image. Okay, what we're going to look at afterwards is creating our geometry however we want first, and then unwrapping it in a certain way to lay it down flat in our UV space, and then adding a texture image to that afterwards. Okay, so we're looking at a simple method for now. And we're hopefully moving through this in a fairly methodical way, adding simple image color through materials, and now adding more sophistication through simple textures, and then we'll kind of continue and build from there. Okay, all right, so let's jump out of this for a moment. Let's go in here. Let me go for a new document. Generally speaking, this document is not, but generally speaking, it's best practice to work with powers of 2. So 2 units by 2 pixels by 2 pixels, 8 pixels or 4 pixels by 4 pixels, 16 pixels by 16 pixels, or powers of 2, I should say. 64 by 64, you know, or 32 by 32, 128 by 128, 256 and 256, 512, 512, 1024, 1024. So it's optimal if I'm making a new image. And actually, if you work in Krita, let's open Krita. If you don't have Krita, you can use Photoshop. It really doesn't matter which program you use to make your textures. But if I'm in Krita, Krita is nice because it has, if I go to new, I have this texture template option, right? So I can choose 1024 by 1024, for example, 512 by 512. Let's go for 1024 by 1024. Just make that template. Okay, and so let's do exactly what I just said. Let's try. Let's get our layers. Let's turn off our bottom layer. Let's make, like, say, let's pretend this is a blade of grass. Let's get my color dialog. So let's say this is some grass. Okay, and I'm doing this on a transparency. That's pretty important. Let's make a rock. Let me get a nice brush for this. I'm trying to remember which brushes I like here. This one? Nope. This one. So let's back up. So let's get a nice rock color, nice gray. Make a simple rock shape. Add like a nice two-tone to that. My grass, I'm not feeling this grass. Let's go for get some blues in that grass. Okay, let me erase. Okay, so I'm just I don't know rhyme or reason, but I'm just making like separate, like almost like a sprite sheet, almost like a tile sheet that we made for our games, our 2D games. So let's get a bush or something like that as well. Let's get a nice green color. Yeah, this could be Photoshop. All I'm doing is making this image. This could be pixel art. This could be a like Pixel or something like that. It could be anything. Let's make a flower or something like that, or let's duplicate this. Let's make a copy of one of these. If I can remember how to use how do I get a marquee selection again? I'll just redraw. Okay, so I have this. Get some of that nice kind of value, color, and let's add some nice flowers, some red or pink flowers to this. Okay, I'm actually going to make like a nice ground plane as well, like some ground texture. I'll make this bigger because it'll need some more space. But can you start imagining how I'm going to handle this? Like once I get into 3D, I'm going to bring this in as an image plane, and then I'm going to tell to make multiple simple objects, like just simple planes. I'm going to assign each of them to a different region on this UV, within the UV space that corresponds with this underlying graphic. Okay, so I think that okay, so this is like kind of a top view. But you can be creative. You can kind of set this up however you like. Okay, so again, this is one method of UV mapping. I wouldn't even say it's all that common, but I will say it's fairly simple. And I think it's a good starting point. So I am doing something a little different with you guys this year than I have in years past, in that I'm showing you this way first. But I think and I hope that it will demystify to some degree the relationship between geometry and the UV space and the images that we map to our geometry through the UV space. Okay, so anyways, we have this. What else do we want in this little scene? Maybe a nice little log or something like that. And that'll be our last element. The other thing you don't have to do, but it's wise to do, is I'm trying to maximize this space, this UV space that I have here, as much as possible. Okay, and I don't want to spend too much time doing this, but the more time I spend, the better it will kind of come out. The better it will look when I finish. Okay, and by all means, you can sketch this out. You can sketch these out and kind of map it out that way. But anyways, here we have our simple kind of like set of elements that we can kind of start playing with. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to File, Export, and let's save this to my desktop. I'll save it as a PNG. PNG is a great format just because it has the transparency baked into it. And I'll call this meadow text textures. All right. Okay, so we saved that. Yep, Aiden. So yeah, I am absolutely doing this in the opposite order deliberately, because I'm trying to show you the flexibility of working with UVs. You can make the image first, which I think simpler. You know, for those who have done UVs and get it, it's simple. Oh, why don't you just make them object, unwrap it, and then, you know, apply the image after. But I think this, I hope, will demystify the process to some degree. Let me get rid of this. Get rid of that. I'll keep this guy. Make him big. Oops. He'll terrorize this meadow, seeing that I'm going to build. I'm also going to probably add a light. I'll add another light. Shift A. Light. Sun. Use a sunlight this time, just so like it lights everything kind of evenly. Give it a bit of a direction. I'll also turn off the shadow on that light and just reduce its strength ever so slightly. All right, so let's go ahead here. I'm going to press Shift A. Just going to put my 3D cursor there. Shift A. I'm going to add an image. Again, add an image this time. Image as plane. I'm going to go to my desktop. I'm going to get that meadow texture. Import that. Just scale it up like so. Just raise it up a little bit as well. Okay, so now you see we have this. I can duplicate it, Shift D to duplicate it, move it along the x-axis. I'll take this original copy though, dive into edit mode, and then just kind of adjust the shape of this. I'll use this as my meadows floor. Okay, and I can make this really big, like so. The big consideration I have to kind of be mindful of here is whether or not this texture, because this is a 1K image, so this is approximately 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. So this is slightly less than that. This is maybe 700 pixels or 650 pixels by about 600 pixels. So the bigger I blow that up, the more kind of the kind of more blurry it's going to get, the more pixelated it's going to get. So I have a kind of a limit of how big I can get this while retaining the quality that I want, you know, under close scrutiny. It's going to start to look like an old N64 style texture before I know it, right? So another weird thing that's happening, because I have the transparency, you'll see that it's kind of like fighting. It's not sure which one to show in front, which one to show behind. I'm just going to go into the settings, material settings on this one. And where it says blend mode, alpha blend, I'm going to set it to alpha clip. Okay, and what that's going to do, it's basically going to, like, it's not as precise, but it's going to basically look for which pixels are of this threshold, which pixels are greater than 50% opaque. Anything greater than 50% opaque, make it 100% opaque. Anything less than the threshold, make it transparent. So you can actually scrub this as well. You see the parts that were more transparent are starting to erode and disappear, and eventually the whole thing does. But I can play with that and kind of bring everything back, and it also has the nice effect of not disappearing on me when I have another transparent background around it, or element around it. So anyways, let's make this a little smaller. lets us take that duplicate version we had, just here, just raise that up. I'm going to set this one to alpha clip as well, alpha clip. Just move this one up slightly. So again, set this to alpha clip just so it doesn't disappear on us. I'm going to rotate this one. Like so. Okay, and I'll press tab, go into edit mode. Just select these, the whole thing, and just scale it. And just reveal, say, my rock here. And generally speaking, you don't want to distort this too much. If it's square here, if the geometry is square, I want to keep it square. You saw before, as I distort it, it actually changes the way the image looks. So this distortion will actually, because I've compressed it vertically, it'll actually stretch it vertically up here. So we can kind of see the impact of that. Now, there's tricks I can do. I can change the vertices, the geometry here to, if I scale this on Z also, can kind of match, right? But generally speaking, you don't want to have to do that. So I'm just gonna duplicate this again, Shift D, tab into edit mode, just move this over, whoops, select everything, move it over, get one of my bushes, right, Shift D, move it over here, tab into edit mode, move this, get another bush, Shift D, duplicate in object mode, and tab into edit mode, and then move this here, kind of adjust these so I get more of it. All right, and so now I have like a library of different elements. I can start kind of like placing these around my scene, changing the scale. Whoops. For whatever reason, somehow my pivot point is like offset. Easy fix is this, just kind of go into edit mode, move this closer to my pivot, like so. And I can move that, scale it. Just have this dirt or this grass kind of appear at different spots on my ground. I'm just going to go into a top view. So I'm going to tap 7 on my numpad. I'll press Shift D to duplicate, Shift Z to constrain to the vertical axis. I'll just grab a couple, I'll grab them both, Shift D, duplicate both, and just kind of keep doing kind of the same thing. So you can start kind of dressing up your scene in that way. It's not great, but it is absolutely a viable kind of option. Starting to get like a little bit more sophistication, a little bit more detail into our scene that we had before, right? Let's move this back. All right, so that is another thing we can do. I'm going to look at one or two more things, and we're probably going to have to continue this lesson next week. But the next thing I'm going to look at is we want to go to Krita. We're going to make a brand new file, new. Go for the same thing, 1K texture. Use this template. Okay. And if you remember, we have wrap mode in Krita. So I think Shift W. Yeah, Shift W will give us wrap mode, whereby, or you can click on this. And then in wrap mode, you can basically just kind of paint in a way that will automatically reconnect with itself. Okay, so I can kind of play with this and, you know, get some interesting textures going on. Some grass going, right? So again, very similar actually in some ways to making a 2D tile set, right? Making this kind of tiling texture. We can use it for like a number of things, but grounds, you know, walls, those kinds of things are really, really good candidates for a tiling texture. Because you don't know how big you want it to be in your 3D game. So it makes sense to have, you know, the flexibility to make it extendable. Okay, so there's my grass. And I will file, export. This one doesn't need to be transparent, but I'll keep it as a PNG. I'll call this tileable grass. Save. Okay. Go back into Blender. Okay, this grass is working pretty nice, but if I wanted to extend it if I wanted to extend something further, and if I wanted something to have like slightly higher textile density, it makes sense to go with something different. I could make this smaller. Numpad decimal, by the way, to kind of zoom in on what you have selected. I'm going to press Shift A here, add image as planes. And actually for this one I won't do it that way, just kind of show you the other method. I'm just going to Shift right click here, I'll press Shift A, I'll just add a simple plane. Okay, so this will just be a simple plane, and then I'll add the texture to this. I'm going to go new material. Okay, I'll call this tileable grass. And where it says base color, I'm going to click on this left yellow button, and I'm going to go for image texture. And before I do this, you'll find that I'm going to tab into edit mode. Again, what I mentioned is any object, default object you make in Blender, it's automatically going to have a UV assigned to it. So it's already UV unwrapped. You see that? It's already mapped to the 0 to 1 UV space, right? And again, I could change this however I want, but just to be aware of, if I add an image, it's automatically going to kind of see it because I have UVs. If I don't have UVs, it won't show up on my geometry. Again, it won't either show up in solid mode, so you won't see any of this stuff in solid mode. You'll just see the geocards. Geocards are basically these simply cards that look like made out of geometry that we use for textures. But we'll see it in our preview render, and we will see it in rendered mode. So here, where it says base color, I'll click here. I want an image texture. I'm going to go to open. I'm going to navigate to my desktop. I will get this tileable grass. I'll hit OK. And I'll just lift, whoops. Oh, I applied it to the wrong thing. I applied it to the cube by accident. I must have. Oh, what did I do? I applied it to the wrong thing. That's exactly what I did. So anyways, that's kind of a cool look. I actually like that. Kind of works because it's tileable. Kind of works. You know, I can add a nice bevel to this. Bevel modifier. It's a happy accident here. But I have a nice like hedge bush now, right? make it rougher, just the, okay, so, and then this guy here, I will make sure I set it here. So since I actually already brought it in, I can actually find it in here. It's this tileable grass, but normally we would go to open, desktop, tileable grass, and it's there. Boom. And what I want to show with this is that we can now use our modifier stack, and we can use an array modifier to kind of make more and more and more of these. And because the texture is tiling, they all automatically just hook up with each other, right? So we have this one instance of the geometry, or one original, but then each of the instances is kind of having the same material. Then I can add another array modifier. So in our wrench tool, add a modifier array. This time for the second array, I'll make sure it goes on the y-axis. Okay, and I can make that bigger like so. Okay, so then I can position this accordingly, and I have my nice meadow scene. And I can have this kind of sit on top like a hill or something like that. And I can select this one. I can press right click here, I can subdivide it several times. Go in with my proportional editing, select the point. You can use your mouse wheel, by the way, to change the size of the area of fall off, and kind of get this going to look more like a something organic. And if these green colors were like better matchy, then this would look even better. But anyways, this is kind of how we can start playing around with this. We'll get into more kind of sophisticated UV unwrapping next class, because we didn't get to it today. But practice this, play with it, have fun with it, and kind of see what can be done. But this is starting with an image first, or images first, and then kind of working with the geometry after the fact. Okay. Okay, but you see, putting together a simple little scene here is not too much of a challenge. Okay. All right, so hopefully that made sense, guys. We've got about 10 more minutes. I want to talk about our assignment. Okay, we're gonna have to do the Sketchfab stuff. We'll go more in depth on the Sketchfab stuff and the more complex UV mapping and texturing next week. But try to grasp this concept of the 0 to 1 correspondence of the UV coordinate space, right? And how that is assigned to each of our objects. And actually, let's take a look at this. So let's take a look at the UVs on this. So if I look at the UV map, you see what's happening. You see how this is assigned to the texture. Okay, so see how I move this around, it affects this, right? If I just move the point, let me turn off proportional editing here. Let's see, that's the top. See how it distorts? Okay. And this is what I was trying to show before. By default, if I move this outside of my UV coordinate space, you'd think it should be blank, right? And that's what happened when I brought this in as an image plane. But by default, if you set it up on your own, it wraps around. So whatever is within this UV coordinate space, this image will also be wrapped over here. So we can't see it, but this will, if I move this G, X, and I move it by 1, it will actually have exactly the same texture applied as it did before. So we can actually preview this. Press Ctrl Z, and you see it doesn't change, right? G, X, 1. It changed a little bit, tiny amount. But generally speaking, it should be exactly the same. as it would have been here. All right, so kind of a neat thing that can be kind of taken advantage of. When you have a tiling texture, you can make the density greater and greater by if I make this bigger and bigger and bigger. If I make this really big, you see I get a really fine application of that texture, right? Whereas if I make this really small, I get a very kind of stretched version of that texture, right? It starts to look problematic the more I stretch it there. Okay, so guys, if this is unclear to you, please go back, review, just kind of get straightened out on like any parts that were confusing. There are lots and lots of good videos out there too on how to UV unwrap in Blender, and we have some students in the class who are already familiar with it. I've also made it a priority for the TAs to make sure that you get solid with UV unwrapping and also modeling, okay? But anyways, let's talk about our assignment. Let's go for all right, so our assignment 1 diorama. This is going to be due October 10th. Okay, so we have about 3 weeks. It's going to be due, I believe, on the Sunday prior to class. But for this assignment, students will be completing the diorama scene that they have planned out and blocked out in weekly activities. So that will be our weekly activity today as well. Basically plotting this out, planning it out, going through our 7 Ps, doing any initial thumbnail sketches and composing this thing, do any research, looking on Sketchfab for ideas that you really like or inspired by or otherwise, and just trying to get a really good solid composition down. But anyways, so for this assignment, students will be completing the diorama scene that they have planned out and blocked out in weekly activities. You will submit to Sketchfab a final version of your diorama that demonstrates good modeling practices, effective use of texture, and a compelling overall composition. Students are expected to make use of all the tools available in Sketchfab to bring their diorama to life. So again, we will cover this. We didn't get to it today, but we'll absolutely cover it next time. That includes choosing an appropriate background color, choosing appropriate lighting, incorporating post-process effects, and adding music or sound effects to help generate correct ambiance. So budget, what is a budget? Basically, generally speaking, in a scene, you want to be in control of how many polygons you're using, right? So how many of those little faces do you have? Or, you know, the squares or triangles. And then how big are our texture maps? So we looked just now at me making a 1K map in Krita, right? And I was able to kind of use that quite extensively to get rocks and bushes and, you know, patches of grass and different things like that. So our budget is going to be 20,000 triangles and 2K texture maps. So this is actually quite a generous budget. If you think about it, a 2K texture map, right, consists of 4 1K texture maps. All right, so everything I just made, like, what did I have? I had grass, I had a rock, I had a bush, I had another bush, I had a log. Oh, I didn't use my log. That's what I forgot to use. And I had another bigger patch of grass. I fit all of that into one 1K texture map. You guys have 2 2K texture maps that you can use in total. Okay? 2 times 2K. All right, so you have quite a lot of budget to work with. And if you plan it properly, strategically, you can absolutely get a ton of good details and texture usage this way. Okay, so you can use this however you want. You can do one, if you want, you can do 1 2K by 4K, right? You can use, you know, 4 separate 1K maps, right? And then one 2K map. It's totally up to you. It's totally up to you how you guys approach this, but that's your budget. You have total 2 times 2K maps, okay? Okay, so 2K is basically 2048 by 2048. Okay, it's called 2K because it's easier to say. All right, and then okay, so I have that there. So assignment or assessment. So students will be assessed based on the overall composition and appeal. So good use of light and shadow. So I talked in today's lesson about, being strategic about how we use lights. If we use a sunlight or a directional light, we get these really long, nice kind of shadow shapes in certain situations. If we use a point light, we get really specific and detailed kind of pockets of light in certain areas. And then if you use a spotlight, we kind of get a mixture of both of those, where we can have more targeted, directed light, but we also get these nice fall off of the light based on how close or far it is to the geometry. So anyways, compose it out, consider light, shadow, consider the elements and principles of design, think about how you're harmonizing things, think about how you're contrasting things, be conscious of it, play with it, and try to get the eye to read, or get the things that you want to read properly. Make sure that we focus on what you want us to focus on. So usage of shapes and the overall arrangement make sure that the usage of shapes and arrangement is pleasing to the eye. Good use of the elements and principles of design. So the diorama shows clear and deliberate use of the principles and elements of design in composition. Modeling competency, so sound modeling practices, demonstrates a good understanding of how to manipulate an object's vertices, edges, and faces to make sophisticated forms. Avoidance of n-gons and triangles and meshes. Triangles aren't the worst thing in the world, but we don't want to overdo it. Okay, so try to use mostly quads. A few triangles here and there will not be a problem. N-gons, do your best to try to avoid them. Okay. I mean, if you can avoid triangles too, even better. Efficient use of topology, no unnecessary edge loops and subdivisions. So we saw an example earlier today of the knife or the katana that had a bunch of edge loops that were just kind of there because the handle needed them. If the handle needs them, put them in the handle. If the blade does not need them, don't put them in the blade. Find a way to either reduce the amount of topology in a certain spot, or have separated meshes where the blade is lower poly, right? Because that's all it needs, and the handle is higher poly. Geometry should serve a purpose. Detail should be localized using extrusions, bevels, and strategically placed edge loops. Effective texture usage. Textures should work in favor of the overall design. I suggest mapping things out with materials first. Figure out what your colors should be. If it works compositionally with the lights and simple materials, try to make sure that your textures are similar to the material colors that you've used. That's my recommendation to you guys. That way the textures will just kind of add. They won't change drastically. They'll just add to the nice composition that you've already established. So textures should work in favor of the overall design. Texture quality should be good. There shouldn't be an unintended pixelation or blurriness in the textures. So I showed you how the size of our UV islands or how much space it's taking up within our UV map affects how blurry or how sharp our textures are. So again, the more space you use on your UV map, the better texture quality you have. The smaller the space you use on your UV map, the more blurry and pixelated things will start looking. UV islands should take up as much of the UV coordinate space without overlapping. Okay. Textures should be well laid out, and then you should stay within the 2K texture map budget. And then finally, process work. Please include any preliminary sketches you have, any reference images that you've pulled from, screenshots off Sketchfab or ArtStation or a video game that you play or what have you. Please, again, no plagiarism, guys. Everything should be your own original work. You can, of course, take inspiration from elsewhere, but please do not blatantly copy anything. And then, of course, your 7 Ps breakdown, which will be your weekly activity this week. So you're going to break this all down with your 7 Ps, and that'll be part of your process work. All right, so for our submission, it should be an embedded process work. Okay, images, an embedded Sketchfab file. We'll talk about how to do that probably next class. Please set autoplay to off before you embed. We'll talk about that as well. And then also attach your blend file so I can go in and look at the actual geometry to see, if you've done things properly. All right, so that is effectively it, guys. For our weekly activity, let me reveal that. Plan out your diorama scene. So basically, yes. Yeah, question? Question.
For the office hours on Friday, it's 11 to 12.
Yep.
We have a lab during those times. Are you able to move the?
I can also do by appointment.
The
so
office hours to a later date or later time.
I can just we can explore doing that. But what I also happy to do is if you ever want to kind of meet with me, I can make a specific appointment. If that works. But I'll explore that. I'll potentially look at doing that. It's just for my other classes that time seems to work. But yeah.
Yeah, that works. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right, so so we have here the this is the weekly activity for this week. So do your 7 Ps. Okay, I believe this is going to kind of link us to what that is. So just kind of refresher. Find your purpose, right? Tell a story. Is it a joke? Are you trying to make someone laugh? Is it dramatic? Is it moody? How do you want to make your audience feel? What's your protagonist? Is it character, object, place, building, structure? What is it? Proportions. A tall, skinny can, big, stout can, or same thing for character. I'd love for you guys, you don't have to put a character in this, but I'd love for you to think about if you were going to have a character and plan for the possibility that you will add one at some point. But it doesn't require a character at this point. So again, purpose, protagonist, proportions, pose, personality, perspective, and presentation. And then finally, include any references or links to relevant examples, any drawings, plans, or sketches that you've done or are doing. Okay, so that's it. That's our weekly activity this week. Guys, just map out, plan out what you want to do for your diorama. Look at lots of examples, get inspired, and then think about the image and the story that you'd like to tell. Okay, we're at time. Yeah, we're just over time here, but I encourage you look at some examples on Sketchfab and try to kind of get inspired. And there are simple dioramas, there are complex dioramas, there's all kinds, right? But you can reuse elements. You can make a tree, tweak it a little bit, reuse it, or just kind of make a brick. There's all kinds of cool things that can be done. All right, guys, so this can be a fun assignment. Think of the story and try to find some emotional attachment that you can have with this piece so that you'll be passionate about making it. Okay, don't care about what I want, care about what you want to make. And then just try to execute it nicely, okay? And then I'll be able to appreciate it on that level. All right, guys, so thanks so much. I appreciate you guys sticking with me all this time, and any questions, absolutely just let me know. And then the TAs will be able to kind of continue to support you guys with this tomorrow. All right, guys. Thanks, everybody. Yes, post images as well, please. Yes. It can be related to your GDW game. Yes. And well, you don't have to finish the diorama yet, but that is a way you can do it. Yes, we're going to talk about another way to texture things next class. And you have some classmates, Aiden and I believe Nathaniel will be able to help you and support with that as well as the TAs. Jeremy absolutely can help you with that. All right, guys. All right. So if anyone has questions, just let me know. But I'm going to close out the YouTube stream and I'll kind of just jump over to Google Meet for a moment. All right. Take care, everybody.